Welcome back, friends, to another session of finite element methods for fluid dynamics. We've so far looked at a one-dimensional problem, and now we are ready to move on to 2 and 3 dimensions. So we'll first make some kind of a nomenclature, and then we are going to work out the analysis. So let's introduce a variable called number of spatial dimensions, NSD. So this is equal to 2 for 2 dimensions and 3 for 3 dimensions. We are also going to denote the location of any point by x. So x belongs to the domain R, omega, and omega actually could be something like NSD. Okay. So if I have, let's say, a 2-dimensional vector, then I would be associating with 2 real numbers. If I have a 3D vector, it has 3 components, then I would have 3 real numbers that denote its location. And I can use different notations for x. For example, x could be something like xi plus yj plus zk. This is the traditional way of writing it. I could also write it as x1 I plus x2 j plus x3 k, where x1, x2 and x3, they refer to the 3 components along the 3 Cartesian axes. Or I could also write this as, x1 I1 plus x2 I2 plus x3 I3, and I1, I2 and I3 are the unit vectors along the 3 directions. So I'll use something called the index notation, wherein I can simply write x as xi I, where the repeated index implies summation from 1 to, let's say, NSD in this case. Okay. So xi I, here I is the repeated index, so I would have to elaborate this as a sum of 3 terms, and that's what it would expand to. Alright, so that's my x. Let me denote my domain in terms of, let's say, these are the Cartesian directions, and I could say this is my domain omega, and perhaps there is a hole in it, just to be more general. Okay, this domain could be in 2 dimensions or in 3 dimensions. I am going to denote gamma as the boundary of omega. Okay. So there is a domain omega, and it has a boundary, and there are points that lie on the boundary, and they point towards a certain normal. So in terms of the location, so x could be a vector that lies on this domain omega. I can also draw a normal. So the convention is that n is a unit normal that is pointing outside the domain. So for the outer boundary it points like this, and perhaps for an inner boundary it points inward as shown here. I am going to represent n, which is the unit normal to gamma at any point, in terms of its component n1, n2, or let us say n3 in general. So, these are the 3 components, and I could also write this as ni, I, where n are these components along each of the Cartesian axes. All right. We will further assume that the boundary gamma admits the decomposition that gamma is a union of these 2 components, gamma g and gamma h. Okay. So, the entire boundary is composed of 2 parts, gamma g, where a g type boundary condition is specified, and when I denoted the one dimensional problem, then we actually took this as an essential boundary condition. And then there is a gamma h on which an h type boundary condition is specified. We are also going to assume that they do not overlap. So, gamma g and gamma h, their intersection is a null set. Okay, so these are non-overlapping. So, gamma g and gamma h are non-overlapping. So, let me elaborate on this a little bit more. There is a domain omega as shown here, and let us say I want to solve the heat equation on it. Then in terms of the boundary conditions, I could have a boundary condition on the temperature or on the gradient of temperature, which is the flux. What is being said is that at any point on the boundary, I will specify either the temperature, which is through gamma g, or the flux, which is gamma h. Okay. I am further assuming that I cannot specify both the temperature and flux at the same points on the boundary. Okay. So each point on the boundary belongs to either one of these, and they do not overlap. Okay. We are going to restrict to this kind of a decomposition in this class. Of course, you could get differential equations where the boundary conditions could be of mixed type and they could be more complex, but we are not going to cover them in this course. Okay, we are also going to extend our notation for closed and open domains as we did earlier. So, closed and open domain. So, closed would be something like omega with an overbar, and open is of course just the omega. So, let me show this to you in 2 dimensions, so pictorially. So, example in 2 dimensions. So, omega bar is actually omega and union of gamma, the boundary. Okay. So, let us say there is this domain which is omega, and this is the boundary gamma. I am going to decompose this into 2 parts. So, let us say this part is gamma g and the lower part is gamma h. Now, there is an ambiguity as to which boundary does the point on the intersection belong to. Does it belong to gamma g or does it belong to gamma h? And this cannot be resolved by numerics. This has to be resolved by the person or the practitioner who is posing the differential equation and the boundary conditions. Numerics will simply do what we ask it to do. So, we will be very explicit. So, we are going to draw another diagram to show you what is happening here. So, let us say this is the decomposition and this is the boundary gamma g, and this is the boundary gamma h. I can always talk about a boundary where this point is excluded, and if it is excluded, that becomes an open gamma g. Similarly, I can show that in the expanded form, if I have these points here and I exclude them, then this would be gamma h. I can also talk about a closed boundary. So, let me draw a diagram of that. So, I have taken the same boundary, and this time I am going to enclose these points on the boundary. So, these I am going to call as gamma g bar, because it is a closed boundary, and likewise if I wanted to enclose these points, then I can call this as gamma h bar. Okay. So, this is an example of open boundaries, and this is how I am defining the closed boundaries. You can very well see that if I do a union of gamma g and gamma h and then take a closed boundary, then this would simply be gamma g bar union of gamma h bar, and this of course I can call it as gamma bar. Okay. So, the entire boundary can be decomposed into these two parts, gamma g and gamma h. We are going to assume that there will at least be some point that lies on gamma g, and that makes sense because if I, let us say, look at the one dimensional problem that we have considered so far, it is a second order differential equation, and if I do not specify u anywhere at all, then that would be an ill conditioned problem. So, we are going to assume that gamma g is not a null set. Okay. So, there will be at least some points where the boundary will have a Dirichlet boundary condition, but gamma h equal to phi is possible. So, we can have a problem where flux boundary condition is not specified at all, and all the boundary conditions are on the temperature field. Okay. So, this is possible, and we cannot have null set for a gamma g. Let me also explain to you the index notation a little bit more in terms of derivatives. So, suppose u is a field, a scalar field, let us say, and I am interested in its derivatives. So, I could talk about del u by del x, or I could talk about del u by del y, and also del u by del z. These I can denote as u comma x, u comma y, u comma z. I can also denote them in general as u comma I. Okay. So, u comma I is not a repeated quantity here, I is not repeated. So, I will have to take a certain value, for example 1, 2 or 3. But if I want to represent gradient of a vector u, then this can really be represented as u comma I. And now this is a repeated index, and therefore this takes the form u comma 1 I1 plus u comma 2 I2 plus u comma 3 I3, which is really u comma 1 is something like u comma x, u comma 2 is something like u comma y, and likewise. Okay. So, we can put the gradient of a vector in a very compact notation like this. Similarly, if I am interested in the divergence, So let's take a minute, look at a divergence of, let's say, a vector. Let me call this a vector A. Okay, and A is AI II. So the divergence of A can simply be written as A I II, and the gradient vector is something like del by del xj of ij. So this therefore becomes, and there is a dot here because it is the divergence. So I can write this as del ai by del xj, and this becomes aij dotted with ii. This of course is the Kronecker delta because it is a dot product. So ij comma ii is 0 if they are orthogonal to each other, but if they are collinear then these vectors would give a unit product. So this quantity survives. So this, as we know, is 0 if I is not equal to j, and it is 1 if I is equal to j. Right? And therefore this whole quantity can be written as ai comma j times delta ji, but this will survive only if j is equal to I. So I can write this as ai comma I, right? And I here is a repeated index, exactly as here where I is a repeated index and j is also a repeated index. So this quantity in fact has 9 terms, okay, but this one has 3 terms, as you know, a11 plus a22 plus a33. So in a nutshell, what we are saying is that divergence of A is a vector, can be expressed in the index notation simply as ai in a very compact manner. Let's look at a quantity like Laplacian del square phi. Phi is a scalar, a field, and I am interested in this quantity which we know is phi comma xx plus phi comma yy plus phi comma zz, right? And each one of them, as you know, this quantity is actually del square phi by del x square, this one is del square phi by del y square, and this one over here is del square phi by del z square. I can write this in a very compact notation, these 3 terms, as simply phi comma ii, where I is getting repeated, and that would imply summation. So this term actually implies that we are talking about phi comma 11 plus phi comma 22 plus phi comma 33. So the Laplacian of phi is simply phi comma ii, where the repeated index implies sum. Okay, so the index notation is extremely powerful, and it helps us in manipulating many of these vector and tensor operations. We are also going to assume that if we have more than 2 indices, then we will not sum them up. Okay, so only 2 indices would imply summation. Okay, now that we are ready to formulate a 2-dimensional problem, so let's take an example. So we'll look at the linear heat conduction. Okay. So we'll formulate the problem so that it is very general, and you can think of it as if it is in 2 dimensions, but you can generalize it to 3 dimensions also. So here is the notation. Let Qi be the heat flux. So this is the ith component of the heat flux, and Qi ii is the heat flux vector. Okay. U we are going to denote for the temperature. And we are going to use the notation F as the heat source, or for that matter the heat supply. We also know the Fourier's law of heat conduction. It's a law, so it cannot really be proved, and it says that Qi, that each component of the heat flux is given as minus Kij times U comma j. In the vector form, this law would mean that the heat flux Q is actually minus the heat conductivity matrix K times the gradient of the temperature. So I am sure this you have seen many times. In general, heat flux is a vector, U is a scalar field, it is a temperature, so gradient of the scalar would be a vector field, and the heat conductivity is a tensor, it is a second order tensor. Let me say a few things about this tensor K.